Hi, everyone. Ted Wyman here with another edition of Jet Setting. And this time we are going to do the You Be the Boss edition of Jet Setting. This is a tradition at the Winnipeg Sun for many years involving both the Winnipeg Jets and the Blue Bombers, where we put a survey out and give you, the reader and the fan, a chance to decide what you would do if you were the GM or, let's say, even owner of the Winnipeg Jets. And in this case, we are going to talk specifically about things that happened last season with head coach Rick Bowness, some of the players, a lot of the things that went on. Scott Billeck and I are going to do our best to answer these questions for you, at least a few of them. And then you guys can, of course, go and choose whichever responses you want yourselves. It'll be online at winnipegsun.com all this coming week. So, Scott Billeck, putting you on the hot seat right off the bat. You did come up with a lot of these questions, so you should know the answers. So we'll go right to it. And I'm going to start off with, how did you feel Rick Bowness did in his first year as head coach? Now, the answers we're offering are not too shabby for his first season. Meh, nothing really changed in the end. He was doomed from the beginning with the current core of players, or I'd like to see what he can achieve if the Jets trim the fat. Scott?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the last one, right? I mean, I think part of what so the last one being, I'd like to see what he can achieve with the Jets trim the fat. I think what we saw early on in the season was a team that, maybe hadn't trimmed the fat, so to speak, but still had everybody in this kind of honeymoon phase with the new head coach. And so they were all kind of, eager to please and play within their new system and all that. And because of some of all the injuries that they had, they really had a lot of guys, and we'll use Mikey Esamont as an example of guys really trying to kind of make their mark in the NHL because they're being given a chance with the injuries the Jets had. So to me, I thought Rick Bowness had a very, well, for the first part of the season, had a very consistent kind of way that he was addressing the team. It was never being satisfied, let's say. And I thought he extracted a lot out of the team that he needed to extract out of the team. That waned over, the course of the latter half of the season. I thought, and Rick said it himself, some guys started going their own way. So that was a problem. But I would like to see what he could do with, a team with everybody kind of pointing in one direction and not having, these kind of splintered cells of players who would do their own thing. So that's where I'm at with him. I think there's more in Rick Bowness. I think he showed pride of coaching and all those sorts of things and wanting to get this team to the next level. But it was the players, some of the players at least, that weren't interested in doing that. So that's where I land on that one. We've talked a lot about Kevin Cheveldayoff. He's here, he's staying, he'll be the GM for a 13th season. But for you, Ted, I mean, if you look at it, do you trust the direction that he's taken, the direction under with his team under Cheveldayoff? And some of the questions we had was yes, or the answers yes, implicitly, yes, but he needs to provide fans with a vision. No, just getting the playoffs isn't enough, or no, he's well past his due date.
Oh, boy. Well, that's a tough one. It's certainly not yes implicitly. I mean, right. and I don't think, I just don't know how you could say that. The truth is, Kevin Cheveldayoff's been here a long time. This is 12 seasons for him. He's been around and he's had his opportunities to make this work. Now, there's no question whatsoever that he is hampered somewhat. I'm not just trying to make an excuse. It's just not as easy to attract free agents to come to Winnipeg. And it's a harder job for a GM here because you really do have to go through the draft. And in the Jets case, they've had some situations where players didn't, they drafted well enough, I think so well, that they had a lot of players that were going to make a lot of money, and some of them had to be moved out. Some of them didn't want to be here. Again, that makes it more difficult. So there is a built-in excuse for Cheveldayoff, but I don't think you can give it to him forever. So getting into the playoffs isn't enough. And that's how I feel about it. I think he probably deserves at least another chance, but I don't think the leash should be long with Cheveldayoff. And one of the reasons why I say that is the same thing as I'll say with a head coach. Of the teams that are playing in the Stanley Cup right now still, Florida, Dallas, Vegas, you know, I mean, who is those are all new coaches. So the teams go out and they get new coaches and they are doing better. And I think the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to move in that direction with the general manager, and other teams do it as well. And when you make those kinds of changes, it can have a real positive effect. I think that's one thing where the Winnipeg Jets have had too much loyalty with Kevin Cheveldayoff and haven't looked for a new vision for their franchise for a long time. So that's where I stand on that one.
Yep.
Scott, what do you think what was the single biggest issue with the Jets this season? We've got coaching, system, special teams, deployment, etc., roster competition, acquisitions, signings, call-ups, etc. The core leadership group, culture, or accountability?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I did this one and I'm like, well, that could be a blend of a bunch of them, but didn't want to do A, B, and C, or A, E, and D, or whatever, right? Like, you don't want it to be kind of all over the place. But to me, I mean, it goes literally to the end of the season and accountability. You watch how that team played in Game 5 of the against Vegas, and obviously lost that game and was punted from the Stanley Cup playoffs. And then you look at kind of the way that they addressed at the end of the year, and they took more umbrage with the fact that Rick Bowness got a little upset after the game rather than their own play on the ice. And you talked about looking at the playoffs still and who was still in, and if as soon as the Jets kind of went that way, you were watching. Okay, well, Boston lost in 7 games to the Florida Panthers. How did they handle it? Well, Brad Marchand came out from the Boston Bruins and basically said, this is on me. And he's not even the captain of the team. And you look at Carolina in the second round and playing New Jersey, and Rod Brindamore tears a strip off his team, and you look at the reaction. They come out and they win their next game in that series. Or Lindy Ruff did that in the same series with his New Jersey Devils. They came out and won that game. So it's not the first time a coach has publicly kind of reamed out his players, and the players in those situations responded the way that you would want them to respond. And I don't think those players really needed to even be told from their head coach that they played, because they already knew. You look at Vegas, even in the series with Dallas, they lose game 4, to Dallas when they were already up 3-0 in that series. And the Vegas players are like, yeah, we just don't want it enough, right? And so you didn't hear those types of things from the Jets at the end of the season, from their team, from this Jets team. You instead heard right from the first guy who spoke, in Blake Wheeler, about the idea that well, Rick said this and we were upset about that, and then it wasn't really about this team needing to be better, or the on ice play needed to be better, or anything like that. To me, it was always about accountability, and I think that still and that could be a core leadership group for sure. It could be a cultural issue, definitely, but I don't think it was coaching. I don't think it was even, I mean, roster composition kind of moves into all of those things because of it, but I think accountability, end of the day, was the big thing that the Jets were kind of lacking again this year. And this stretches back to Paul Stastny talking about basically the same thing at the end of last season, when the Jets didn't even make the playoffs. So this is just accountability seems to be the thing that really kind of permeates, or is the umbrella under some of the other issues. And this is something that this team needs to definitely it needs to address. I mean, you need a group of players that hold each other accountable, and don't need the head coach to kind of tell them. That they need to know, this Jets team needs to know, the players need to know what's good hockey and what's bad hockey, and they don't need to take the bait like they did with Bonus's comments at the end of the year. So because that's exactly what they did. But we talked about Blake Wheeler because he was kind of the one that went into this sort of the last press conference, and he was the first one to kind of answer questions, and he set the tone for whether that was organic or not. He set the tone for the rest of that exit interview. So we have a question here looking back at stripping Blake Wheeler of the captaincy and whether it was the right move or not. If this is a simple yes or no question, but the third answer that we have on here is it didn't make a difference either way, essentially. Ted, how do you kind of see what they did with Blake Wheeler stripping the captaincy, and was it the right move for this team?
I think it was absolutely the right move, and I don't think it made enough of a difference. I mean, I think you saw many players, including Adam Lowry, as you said, Kyle Connors, another. I remember saying it specifically. Blake Wheeler's still basically our captain. He's still our leader. He didn't have the C, but he was our captain.
Yeah.
So that's not enough of a change to just take the C off of him. If he's still in the room and he's still having that kind of an influence, and we're all talked about this. We don't think the core leadership group is has enough accountability, as you just said, to get the job done in these situations. So why are you going to stick with the same captain? And I mean, the fact is, I honestly believe this. I've been saying it for a while. As much great service as Blake Wheeler has done for the Winnipeg Jets, as much as he's done in recent years, and they nominated him for the King Clancy Award yet again this year because he's a big guy in the community and he's been an important part of this Winnipeg Jets organization. It is time to move on from him in whatever method possible. If it's a trade, if it's a buyout, whatever you have to do, they need to change the voices in that locker, in that dressing room. Paul Maurice said it last year. He thought maybe one big overseeing voice would make the difference. They need to change the voices in there, period. And I personally think that, not only should he not be in the mix anymore, potentially not Mark Scheifele either. I think there's been too much of a leadership from those two, and it hasn't worked. And we've seen what happened, especially this year, with hard nosedives in the season and in the playoffs. It's something to do with culture. It's something to do with accountability. It's something to do with that leadership core. What do you do when there's a rotten apple? You got to get that core out of there.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And that we can lead that into the other question of, well, who do you resign then? I mean, if you had to pick one of these guys, and Blake Wheeler probably wouldn't even be on that, but you would obviously think of Connor Hellebuck right now, Mark Scheifele, as you just talked about, and Pierre-Luc Dubois. And it's kind of an interesting question, for me, because those are the three guys that I would look at as there's a real opportunity here for this season, this offseason. The Jets lose their two top centers, right? That's the possibility, because I think in kind of going back to your answer about obviously Wheeler, but Mark Scheifele, like I think there's certainly a well-built argument that maybe Mark Scheifele needs to go as well, because of the fact that it has been Blake and Mark for such a long time here, and they are two of the guys that have really driven this bus in the dressing room. That we can go back to, well, did Paul Maurice allow that to happen? Or Paul Maurice is very much the room runs the room, but problem was the room was running the room in a way that was detrimental to the team, right, for several years. I'm not sure Mark Scheifele's the reclamation project that this team really wants to invest in, and trying to get him as the leader over the next few years. I mean, for me, it's an easy answer. It's Pierre-Luc Dubois, but I'm not entirely sure that that's even on the table at the moment, because we don't know.
Right.
And it seems like throughout the year, right, like this, you can listen to Pierre Dubois and he say is what he is, but it's not just people in Montreal, reporters in Montreal, kind of fanning the flames of this. I mean, it's also the insiders. It's the big names that are well connected in this industry from all teams that are talking about, yeah, it sounds like Montreal or maybe New York or LA or those types of teams are where Pierre-Luc Dubois wants to be. And so Winnipeg's not obviously on that list. It's not a Montreal. It's definitely not a New York or a Los Angeles. But I mean, I think if you were wanting to change the course of this team, you look at the way that Pierre-Luc Dubois played a lot of this season, really dragging this team along on his own, and he's the guy that you could build this team around. I think. I mean, he's a young centerman still. I think he's 25 at the moment, and is definitely a 1B center in this league, if not a bona fide top line center already. And he's a guy that you could really, I think, build around. He's got the size. He's definitely got the drive and the motivation. So that's one thing for me. But I mean, that might not even be possible. And so it's interesting. Maybe you just don't re-sign any of them. and you start trying to look at, what you can get for these guys and really reshaping. Because Connor Hellebuck is an interesting one too, where he's one of the best goalies in the world without question, but also the guy that you can get the most for in a return, like also without question, because very rarely can you pick up a goaltender that is in his prime of his career still and is a number one goaltender, can play 65 games a year like he did this year, 64, can play more than that, and he will get you a Vezina caliber season almost every season that he's played in the NHL now. So it's a really interesting question of, do they look to re-sign one of them, two of them, or maybe even none of them, and really rejig this roster completely, because that's one of the things. And I don't know, Ted, if we want to talk about, is there an appetite maybe for a rebuild? Just thinking about it as I talk here. But if you lose, let's say you lose Mark Scheifele, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Connor Hellebuck this summer, are you not rebuilding at that point?
Yeah,
Like, I mean, right, exactly, right. I mean, so I don't know where you feel about the rebuild. I know, if you would support one or not? I mean, for the answers that we had here were yes, this team has failed to achieve success, yes, but if it involves promoting young talent, yes, but only if another GM is at the controls, which is an interesting question based on what we did, or no, a retooling is the preference over a rebuild. I don't know, where do you fall kind of maybe in that?
I think a rebuild's impossible in this market right now. I don't know how, when you're trying to have a big season ticket push like they are, when they've had a declining attendance, I just don't know how you could possibly go into a rebuild mode and expect things to get any better. It would be really, really challenging for this organization for its future, I think, if you went into a full rebuild. Now, that doesn't mean you can't trade some of these players, because the job you have to make sure you do as general manager in this case is to get a return of players who can play. Make sure you're getting NHL quality player for NHL quality player. You can't just look at a rebuild through, draft picks. I don't think, because I just don't think that you're going to have a strong enough team, a competitive enough team going forward if you do that. But as you said, Connor Hellebuck should be worth a lot. Pierre-Luc Dubois should be worth a lot. Mark Scheifele should be worth a lot. And if you can get the kind of return, maybe younger players. But look what happened with Nashville. They started trading guys. They promoted from within. They brought in guys that they traded for, and they almost made the playoffs, playing much better than they had when they had all their top players. So it is possible. And I think, in my mind, a retooling is the only way to go here, and not one that significantly drops this team out of playoff contention. I mean, at least they got to try to be staying close, and I think they can do that. The last question we had here, Scott, and we should wrap this up pretty quickly, let the fans get to doing their picks as well, is who is the MVP of the Jets this year? We've got Pierre-Luc Dubois, Connor Hellebuck, Mark Scheifele, and Josh Morrissey. And I'll just give mine quickly with very little explanation. I think it's Josh Morrissey. I think the way he played, the way he came on this year in all that he's done, in terms of who he was a year ago and who he was this year, he really improved the Winnipeg Jets from the back end. So that's my pick.
Yeah, mine's Connor Hellebuck, and I think in my opinion, it's not close. And the reason why is, Josh Morrissey, a fantastic season. I mean, you can't take anything away from it. We've seen he's not a Norris finalist, but my guess is he'll fall in fourth or fifth in that voting once it comes out at the NHL awards next month. But for me, it's Connor Hellebuck. He's a Vezina finalist this year, again, for the third time in his career. He probably doesn't win it just because Linus Ullmark in Boston had unbelievable numbers playing in an unbelievable NFC.
Not in the playoffs.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then we could also make the same.
Neither did Hellebuck.
Hellebuck, right? Yeah, but this is it's always a regular season award, regardless. And for me, Connor Hellebuck, from start to finish of the year, he didn't really dip a whole lot. He played really well, and when the Jets needed him, and he played, I believe it was 13 straight games down the stretch there. I mean, he willed that team into the playoffs. And Josh Morrissey, during that time, he played well. Don't get me wrong, but he wasn't putting up the same numbers as he was in the first half of the season. at that point. So for me, it's Connor Hellebuck because to me, it just felt like another one of these seasons. Like if they didn't have Connor Hellebuck on this roster, this team didn't sniff the playoffs no matter what. I mean, David Riddick was serviceable enough this year, but I think there was times definitely that if they had to depend on David Riddick, they weren't getting anywhere at this point. And so, yeah, again, for me, it's Connor Hellebuck. I mean, for me, it's always perennial, it seems, with Hellebuck because of the way that he's really masked a lot of this team's deficiencies. And I think he did it again this year. And really, when this team needed him the most, he stepped up again and dragged them into the playoffs. So, yeah, I mean, this is, we can wrap this up for sure. And there'll be, there's plenty more questions for fans to go through. And it's an interesting one because for me, Kevin Cheveldaff is still here. So regardless of how you kind of feel about whether he should be or shouldn't be with this team right now, he's here and he's the one that's going to make a lot of these big decisions. And this is a huge summer for this Winnipeg Jets team. I feel like we've said this summer after summer, but this one's a different one. This is the next step in building a Stanley Cup contender. This is really largely even potentially about a lot of damage limitation about who you, like as you said, Ted, who you can bring in for the guys that you might be or possibly or for sure sending out. And can this team, as you've talked about, retool kind of on the fly and still make a team that is kind of playoff worthy and that will be in that mix and avoid, as you talked about as well, that rebuild. So yeah, I think there's a lot of good questions in here for fans and kind of really get a sense. We've had a month or so now since the end of the season. I think there's now a time where fans can really kind of sit down with this and there's not that emotion of losing in the playoffs and the end of the season and how that all kind of transpired with the exit interviews. There's time to really kind of just sit and with a clear mind and maybe less angst at times and really kind of go through these questions. So I hope people have fun and we will certainly look forward to the questions and the answers. And I guess I can wrap this up. It's been another edition of Jet Setting, this time You Be the Boss version with Ted Wyman and myself. So thanks for watching and I look forward to kind of seeing where all your answers kind of come in and how you guys feel about it. So thanks again, and we'll wrap this up in about a week and give the data out and see where everybody lies. Thanks.